the body. Darwin as a man who lived and died. But there was a sense in which, if I were a scientist at that time, I would have to meet that dude. Like, I would have to meet Darwin and be like, yo, let me pick your brain for 2 minutes. Right? What are you thinking? Like, give me some insight so that I can see what works best for you, and I can adapt those for my own development, right? Such that we have sort of a win-win situation. Darwin wins in terms of his recognition that his theory was so unique and so rigorously defined that it really was generalized. And the satisfaction, the personal satisfaction of having accessed that deeper level of truth and meaning. And then the individual wins because you get to be an apprentice under the tutelage of a dude like that, right? Which can help inform the ways in which you think, right? This is important, right? This is important, and that as we become more cyber and cyber-based in our reality, and I know my lifespan is limited, I won't be here forever, I do want to make that contribution to the future. And I'm not talking 50 years or so, I'm talking 100, 200 years from now. I want to make that contribution in the future, that we need to recognize that importance, right? That importance between sort of a master-apprentice relationship, right? Really being the person to mentor, and simultaneously also being someone who aspires to be led by great minds, right? I still, to this day, despite all of my education and insane levels of conceptual analysis that I'm capable of doing, because this is all that I do, I still look for those people in the world that can do it better than I can do it. And if I can't meet them in the real world, then I try and read as much as I can get my hands on from them. And I have a few authors that I really, really admire, like, big time. And if I meet them, that would be great. I'm not going to name these people because it might inflate their egos. But if I met them, I would be super happy. But I've read everything that they've written, right? So that's as close as I'm going to get to understanding their genius, really. And the bits that I like, I keep, and the bits that I don't like, I don't keep. It win-win for us, because when I write, I reference these people. When I do my video lectures, I reference these people. I will immortalize these people in the work that I do, because I am such a fan of their work, so that when they're dead and gone, it's a huge benefit for them because they're still relevant, because I'm definitely going to carry the baton of these theorists. It's a win for me because I wouldn't be able to do what I do without some of the rigorous thought that inspired them and now informs my work. And I hybridize it and make it my own. So now this is something new. And hopefully people do this with me as well, right? And it goes on and on and on and on and on. That's the whole point. Right? So this is not to deny a dialectical process, right? See my video here. The video is a link to Immanuel Kant and David Hume. So watch that. But as the foundation of any good epistemology, we have to demonstrate how we know what we know in terms of facts, right? Now that I read it, I'm like, that's, if they were to cite Dr. Campbell, like you see those memes going all up on Facebook, that's the meme that I want to be my meme, right? Dr. Campbell said, we have to demonstrate how we know what we know in terms of facts. I actually like my sentence, right? I love that. So some great student, when I'm in the grave, send a meme up and say, Dr. Campbell says that, because that's what I say. That's sort of my life practice, right? That's what I do. That's what I represent, right? A demonstration of how we know what we know in terms of facts, right? That's what I'm all about. Now, with that, I'm going to give you, so now that we know how to do it, I'm going to give you an example of what you ought not to do, right? In terms of generalization, right? In terms of generalization, and I'm running out of time again! I didn't think it was going to be this long. Like, I looked down, I'm like, where the hell did all the time go? I'm going to have to go quick now, because I gotta end this section. Oh my goodness. Alright, speed round. Anselm's ontological argument for the existence of God. There is an attempt by Anselm to do exactly what we said. Obviously, we know Anselm comes before Descartes, but it's still the same epistemological attempt. The attempt is to take one instance, one case, and generalize that case across the boards. Anselm conceptualizes a relationship between the theist and the atheist. The theist is a believer. The atheist is not a believer, for all practical purposes. Anselm wants to take this case and generalize and make this case precedence. What's the precedence for? He wants to take this discussion between the atheist and the theist as an instance to demonstrate the existence of God. So he wants to generalize the proof for the existence of God based on this conversation between the atheist and the theist. Anselm says that God is that which nothing or none greater can be conceived, right? That which none greater can be conceived. That's what that stands for, right? So Anselm says that God is the greatest conception possible. And he asks the atheist, he says, hey, atheist, would you agree that there are conceptions? The atheist says, of course, I agree that there are conceptions. The theist says, would you agree that there is the greatest conception? And the atheist, being charitable to the argument, as all good logicians are, say, sure, no problem. There is the greatest conception possible, sure. And the theist says, well, if it's the case that you agree that there are conceptions, and it's the case that you agree that there is the greatest conception, then wouldn't you also recognize that to exist is a greater conception, or the conception of existence is a greater conception than conception independent to existence? That's a bit more technical. But yeah, sure. I mean, that makes sense, right? The conception of an apple is a conception that exists, but a greater conception of the apple is the conception of the apple as contingent on the sense data and projection from an apple that produces my conception of the apple. Sure, I agree with that. That's totally rational. That's totally legit. What Anselm does, which is sort of sneaky, is, remember, we're trying to generalize from an instance. Anselm then says that, well, now we're going to substitute conception with God, right? Because God is the greatest conception, right? The greatest conception cannot possibly exist without it also being realized. You just said that, atheist, didn't you? Didn't you just say, this is the atheist now attacking, quote unquote, logically speaking, the atheist. Didn't you just say that the greatest conception can't be the greatest conception if it's only conceptual? The greatest conception has to be both conceptual and objectual in the Frege sense, right? In Frege, sort of, you borrow his terminology, right? The greatest conception has to be both conceptual and objectual. You can't have the greatest possible conception, that which none greater can be conceived, if it's purely conceptual. Thus, God, as the greatest possible conception, both exist in the conceptual realm and in the physical realm. And this stumped people for a long time. The point is, I mean, there are any number of problems with this argument, equivocation being the smallest of the errors. But what you have to recognize, as my example earlier, maybe an hour, now 2 hours ago, on the aliens, is because there isn't an impossibility of the occurrence of a thing, in no sense necessitates the existence of a thing, right? There has to be a recognition of the conceptual demarcation between the possibility and the existence of a thing, right? The possibility and, to be technical, the necessity of a thing. While there really isn't much effort needed, per se, to demonstrate possibility, there is rigorous amount of demonstration needed to prove, to reinforce the necessity, the claim for necessity, requires tons of demonstration. The headline for this last segment was on the importance of demonstration and how. If you're going to make the argument, as Anselm made, that God exists, which is a fine argument to make, you have to recognize that the demonstration requirement isn't a product of the possible existence of God. You don't really require that much demonstration to prove the possibility of God. You can do a simple logic to say, no, that, I mean, people, I don't want to get too into this, but, you know, being agnostic is sort of the rational, logical position to take, some would argue, right? Because there isn't really contradiction in the description of God, if we're talking about the description of God as having these characteristics, right? There isn't really inherently impossible contradiction in the way in which it's articulated. God is articulated. Some aspects of the function of God people might argue, but in the general canonical sense, God is omniscient, omnipresent, such and such, right? There are ways in which, you know, that could possibly exist. Right? So the requirements for a demonstration of proof of possibility are weaker than the requirements of proof for necessity. If you then do as Anselm does and say, therefore, the greatest conception must exist in the real world, oh, well, now I want to see proof. Just like we did with Darwin. Darwin, where's the proof? Darwin says, well, look at these fossil records, and look at these blood samples, and look at this, and look at this, and look at this, and look at this, and look at this plant, and look at this tree, and look at this island, and look at the right? Okay, that's a ton of proof. That's a ton of proof. That's a lot of evidence. Okay, where's your evidence? Not on the possibility, but the necessity. The point is, you can't then refer back to the logic. We need to see something. Right? There has to be a demonstration of proof in the world. Right? And that does need to be contextualized within the body. So that is a very sort of truncated last bit. I was going to do more, but I black out and I lose track of time. And now I'm over an hour for this section. So I want to end here. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Have a good day.